Good morning. I wanted to hop on today and talk a little bit about how your book may morph over time. No, it's not a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. So, if you have been working on a book for a really long time, and I mean, you've got some maybe old blog posts from 3 years ago, maybe you've got some old videos, maybe you've got notes and journals and all kinds of stuff that you've had over the years. I want you to keep in mind that your story changes over time. Who you are changes over time. So let's say 3 years ago, you sat down and you were writing a little bit about your story, and you've been keeping all this information, thinking that you would use that for your book. Um, you have to think about how you change. And maybe at the time that you started writing that book, it's completely different from where you are today. So you've gone through transformation. You're still growing as a person, you're still learning, you're still getting through challenges, and how you address those things may have changed. How you feel about yourself may have changed. Um, all of that stuff can impact your book. So don't feel like you have to go back to that notebook from 3 years ago and keep every single word that you wrote in there, because it might not even apply today. And I feel like this is something that a lot of people get stuck in, is they feel like they used their time to write that back then and they better use it. Darn it. You don't have to feel that way. Everything that you've written for a reason. Okay. Just like all of the challenges you've overcome, all of the things that you've been through it for a reason. If you're looking back on it, you know that you've grown from it. So think about your writing the same way. If you sat down one day 3 years ago and you wrote 3 chapters in your book, and today you're sitting there going, there's something stuck. I don't know what it is. Look at it from that perspective. I want you to think about where you are today and if that book is going to fit with what you want to write today. And don't worry about scrapping it. Really. If you feel bad, first of all, you don't need to feel bad. But if you do feel bad scrapping it, just put it in a file and label it old. And it's, all the stuff that you've written that has served you at that moment, and you can put it in that file. You don't have to use it for your book. I have tons of stuff on my computer that I haven't used in books, and I don't feel bad about it. Um, some of it has been good for books, some of it has not been good for books, but you have to make that assessment. So if you're, let's say you're a speaker and you're talking about a certain part of your story, if that's not something that you talked about 3 years ago, then you may have been writing a book for a completely different purpose and a completely different audience. My brand has changed over the years. When I started out, I wasn't working with speakers and coaches and high level professionals. I was working with a lot of people who were new to their business, a lot of people who had just started with their with whatever it was that they were doing, and they were inspired to write a story. I also worked with some people who had low budgets. I worked with people who um, hadn't grown as much as they've grown in the past 3 or 4 years. And all of those people, you know, at that point are not necessarily who I want to talk to today. So, whatever you're looking at with your business, make sure you're looking at your book the same way. You don't want to be pulling yourself backwards and making yourself speak to the audience that you were talking to 3 years ago when you're talking to this audience over here today. Always make sure that your book aligns with your brand. Make sure that it makes sense for you. If you're working on a book and it just feels like it's holding you back, you feel like you're stuck, you don't feel like you're able to write, this is something you really have to consider. Have you grown? Have you changed? Is that book still what will serve your audience? If your audience has changed, then your book probably needs to change too. If you have changed, your book probably needs to change too. When I was working on the Spark Method a couple of years ago, how to write a book for your business fast. At that point, I went back through my blog because I wanted to pull some of the pieces from my blog to use in the book. And there were pieces that I had written in 2016 that didn't work in 2019 because it wasn't the same audience and it wasn't the same person writing it. My tone was different. How I approached these ideas was very different. How I talked to writers was different. And, the audience, especially the audience, I was in a much broader audience at that point. I was talking to people who wanted to write something for their website. Um, I was talking to people who just were thinking about a book and had always dreamed of being a writer. And that's not necessarily who I'm talking to today. And, at that point when I was writing my book, when I was working on the Spark method, I had to go through each of those posts and say, is this what I want to say today? Does that still represent me? In fact, I actually pulled down some of the posts because I realized they weren't aligned with my brand. You want to make sure that you're keeping stuff aligned with your brand, with your audience, and it makes sense. So here's something to think about. Instead of thinking that, you wasted your time writing, think about how much time you're wasting stuck in this spot where you're saying, I've got all this material, I really ought to be using it. But instead, you ought to say, hey, you know what? I had this material, it served me then, and this is what's serving me now. And I'm going to write the book that works for me now because I'm building off of that. I was here before, now I'm here, I'm going to be here, it keeps growing. I want you to think about that. And if you've already hit that point where you're like, all right, this is where I am, this is what's working for me, and you're still stuck, there are other things that you need to think about too. And, I'm happy to help you with that if you wanted to reach out and ask me. But for right now, that's what I want you to think about. Are you using material that isn't going to work for your brand today? Are you looking to the future? Are you saying, hey, this is something that I want to build on for tomorrow? Does it work? Does it make sense? All of that kind of good stuff. So I'd love to answer questions and comments. If you're watching the replay, go ahead and put them below. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and I will talk again soon.